Okay, so let's start the recording. This is a long chapter. Um,
Mm.
but okay. Genesis 18. And the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, and he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, three men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them, and bowed himself to the earth, and said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Get a little water brought and wash your feet, uh, and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, Do as you have said. And Abraham went quickly into the tent to Sarah and said, Quick, 3 seahs of fine flour, knead it and make cakes. Then Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man, who prepared it quickly. Then he took curds and milk and the calf and he had prepared, and he set it before them. He stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, Where is Sarah your wife? And he said, She is in the tent. The Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, Am I worn out, and my Lord is old? Shall I have pleasure? The Lord said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh and say, Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. He said, No, but you did laugh. Then the men set out from there, and they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham went with them and set them on their way. The Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. Then the Lord said, Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know. Then the men turned from there and went towards Sodom. But Abraham still stood before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? And the Lord said, If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Abraham answered and said, Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for a lack of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. And again he spoke to him and said, Suppose 40 are found there. He answered, For the sake of 40, I will not do it. And then he said, Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there. He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. He said, Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there. He answered, For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. He answered, For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way, and when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. Okay, so there is a lot going on in this chapter, um, and a lot, uh, in my opinion, to understand a lot of what is going on, you you have to, um, at a high level, you have to both relate, um, the story and what's taking place, um, and compare it with what's taking place with the meeting, um, with Abraham and Sarah, and compare it with the story that's taking place in Sodom. And obviously, we're not going to get to all of that because um, uh, most of it happens in earnest in the next chapters. But we'll touch on that as we go through. So I want to preface that um, we're gonna have to, I think, to really dive into what's going on here, because I think this is a complicated chapter on a lot of levels. You really have to tie it in to uh, you have to tie the stories into each other, right? Um, you can't do the Sunday school thing where you separate the stories out and you take them as episodic stories. They have to go together, and then they have to go together within the wider context of Genesis, and then they also have to go together with the wider context of the rest of the Bible. Um, so we'll hopefully get into that. So and the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre. So one of the things that I didn't specify as we were reading, but we should pay close attention to the way that the word Lord is used in this passage, right? And so remember, whenever you see Lord in all caps, that's the tetragrammaton. That is the name of God, right? So that is Yahweh, versus just Lord with lowercase, that is Adon or Adonai, right? And so that is um, just like the title. That is literally the word Lord, right? So really, if we were reading this in a word for word translation, that would say, and and Yahweh appeared by the oaks of Mamre, right? And so this is so I've been talking about, as because we've had multiple um instances of possible physical manifestations of Yahweh, um, making themselves known to Abraham. And one of the things that I want to compare this to is the previous chapter, whenever it says, and Yahweh appeared to Abraham, right? A lot of times I feel like in some of these, we think of that appearance as just kind of a disembodied voice like talking, and I argued for why you should think that it's an actual person. And here it's more explicit that literally like three men were standing in front of him, and as you're going to see, one of the men is acting as Yahweh, is speaking for Yahweh, right? And it says the Lord said, right? It as they're walking, one of the men like is speaking as Yahweh, and then the other two are pretty clearly angels, and they are the ones that actually go down into Sodom itself, right? Um, and so you have what is arguably like a pre-incarnate um, uh, theophany of of Christ. Um, and but just to reiterate, my personal headcanon is that in Jesus' timeline, this is actually a post incarnate Christ. But that's something that we're not going to get into. Uh, One of the other things that I want to um, the Oaks of Mamre again. So the Oaks of Mamre are a pretty like central location for Abraham. He sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. Um, this is something I don't want to dwell on too much, but I want to point that out because um, there is a reoccurring theme in both the Old and the New Testament about um, meeting God at the threshold places, right? And so there's even this, right? There's this idea of like he will bless your coming and your going, right? That happens at the threshold place. God meets Moses at the door of his tent, right? He's meeting Abraham here at the door of his tent. And then in the New Testament, you have this idea of Jesus is the gate, right? Jesus is the gate to allow the sheep like in or out, right? And all this stuff. Um, and so there's this there's this uh, connection in this idea about meeting God in liminal spaces. Um, and so again, not something I'm going to go into super um, in depth tonight, but that I think is really important and that at some point later I want to delve into more deeply. Um, Want to point out that the angels look like men. This is one of the things where I always get kind of annoyed by the internet meme of biblically accurate angels, and it's just like an eye monster or whatever. Like, actually, more often than not, a biblically accurate angel just looks like a guy. Um, far more versions when you meet an angel in the text, they just look like people. Um, One question that I think that you should think about whenever you're reading this passage is when Abraham sees these guys, right? He does not refer to them as like he doesn't refer to them as Yahweh. He refers to them as Adonai, right? And so it's not really clear when does Abraham recognize this figure as being the Lord? Is it whenever this figure says, "Is anything too hard for Yahweh?" Right? Like that's the first time where it's pretty clear that the person that from Abraham's perspective, and the person that he's talking to would be Yahweh. So it then brings up the question of like, okay, like why is he doing all of this? Why is he doing all of this stuff? Why is he being nice? Right? Um, and it's either that he's being nice because he's just nice to strangers in general, or it's he's being nice. Well, it could also be he's being nice because something about these people, about these figures, makes him recognize them as being higher status. So, presumably their clothes or whatever it is that they're wearing. And so he treats them in that sort of a way. That's one way you could take it. I don't think that's correct. Um, and then the last way is, well, it could be that he just recognizes this Yahweh figure from their previous encounters, right? If this isn't the first time that he has encountered them, then it makes sense that he is trying to um treat them well, right? Regardless of what that background motivation is, because we can only really speculate. We don't have definitive answers about what that is. I think that the literary reason and the literary rationale for why this portion of the story is in there is because this story is going to be contrasted with the Sodom story, right? And pretty famously, right, the whole debate between like conservative and liberal scholars, right, about um, the destruction of Sodom is what was Sodom's great sin, right? And we'll talk about that more um, later. But to sum it up, the debate is, oh, was it because of the homosexual acts that were occurring, or was it because of their their inhospitable they they were inhospitable. They weren't be they weren't being kind to the stranger, right? Um, and if you're a more liberal person, you go with the it's more about hospitality. And then if you're more conservative, you go with it's more about homosexuality. And really, in my opinion, you're actually supposed to link those things together. You're supposed to kind of intrinsically link those ideas together and understand that there is um, a link between being hospitable and um,
Being straight.
well, um,
I'm just messing around.
but
Yeah.
yeah, but being able to produce children,
Oh,
right? And versus being inhospitable and not producing children. Um, there's a link between those, right? Um, and so I was gonna stop here. So do you want to make any comment or anything about that before I go on
I
about this
think
first
I
little
think I had a
section?
question in there somewhere. I'm trying to remember
Okay.
what it was. Um, you see. I do find it interesting that he like you said, he did whether he clearly recognized it as Yahweh or just some higher being.
Or just
He
a noble
immediately
person, like
or
it's
just a noble person, yeah.
yeah, it's not fully clear. Um,
But he immediately jumps into, you know, hospitality mode, I guess. Actually,
right.
that's kind of interesting. Think I imagine you're about to juxtapose those two things, like the way Abraham treated these strangers versus how these angels were treated by Sodom.
Yes. Yeah. That's the point that I'm trying to get at is that
Yeah,
they don't, right? They're not hospitable. Um
right.
and so uh I don't think it was recorded, but one of the previous weeks we talked about how, and this is one of the ideas that I'm still like working on, but I think this is a really good. I think that these two stories are actually really good examples of what I mean whenever I talk about um, life generating uh, actions or just life generating aspects of life, I guess, and death generating aspects of of life. Um, and both uh the like the positive um like life generating, like things that are life generating and things that are a corruption of those life generating things, right? And what I would argue is that the most clear example of something that is life generating is making a child, right? And so what we have here is we have a story that is about um, a couple that can't have a child, um, and so their life generating capacity is diminished, right? But God can fix their life generating capacity, right? So it's a restoration of that of those life generating functions. Um, and those And other life generating functions are things like being in community, right? So like going to church, like stuff like that, but also like being hospitable, right? So that's how I that's how, in my opinion, those things are connected. Whereas what's happening in Sodom, right? Fundamentally, Sodom is an example of the corruption of those life generating um, functions, right? It's a corruption of uh, the most base life generating functions, right? Which is the homosexuality, but it's also a corruption of the life generating functions um, of the community, right? They're inhospitable. Um, uh, uh, they're they're violent, right? Um, they persecute people, which is why there is an outcry, right? We've talked about that before about like the outcry um, comes from both people and just um, if people are murdered, it comes from their blood that's in the ground, right? That's what happened with Noah, right? Um, uh, and so I think that those tensions are the high level of what's going on here. Okay. Uh, let's keep going. All right. So this is a little bit of a repeat of of last week, right? Because last week, right, God Isaac's birth is promised, right? And God tells Abraham that he's going to have a son, right? And so if you're the
Yes, chapter 17.
yes, in chapter 17. And so
Yeah.
if you're the JEDP person, right? You you take this as being, oh, these are two different stories from two different traditions, right? And they put them together because they kind of happen at like roughly the same time. But I think one of the things that you need to notice here is the difference in the stories, right? That the differences are actually part of the thing that the writer is doing to connect what is going on here, right? And so if you remember, right, what is like the whole
So highlight it.
yeah,
I was unable to be there for Genesis 17, but I want to listen to the recording.
sure, yeah. Um, but the okay, so if we think about um okay, so remember the fundamental thing that's going on here is God is trying to get them to have a child, right? And why is
Yep.
he having them? Why is he having them child? Because that is the child of the promise to make Abraham a great nation, right? And what's the point of making them a great nation? So that they can bless the whole world. What is the
Yeah.
ultimate point of blessing that of the whole world? The whole point of blessing the whole world is to correct what happened in the fall, right? So the
Right.
fall happens, and then God has this plan, and right, and so the story of Abraham is God enacting His plan ultimately to correct the fall. And if we remember
Yep.
back to the fall, one of the fundamental things that happened with the fall is that God goes and He tells the man something, and then it's the man's job to pass that on to the woman so that they can both live in right relationship with other. And what happens is it doesn't get passed correctly. And so when the temptation comes, when Satan comes, the woman messes up and the man just watches, right? Um, and so that that break is part of the fundamental reason for why the fall happens, right? And so here you actually have a similar situation, right? You have that um, God is coming to the man and telling him like what's going to happen, and actually Abraham's already messed it up like a couple of times, and God's coming to him and going, no, 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 it's going to be with Sarah. It's going to be with Sarai, Sarah, your wife, right? And but at that time, she doesn't know, and it's pretty clear from this story, right, that Abraham has not relayed this to um to Sarah, right? And so you actually have the same problem of the information transfer hasn't taken place the way that it should have happened, right? Um, and so what's happening here is by God coming in and just telling Sarah also what's going on, he's correcting that like really fundamental mistake, right? And so this is one of the things that I'm talking about like if you just read the story in isolation, you won't necessarily make that connection of like what is God doing here um at like kind of a high level. Um and this in my opinion is related to, right? This is related to, if you remember a few more chapters ago where we talked about the unconditional covenant, right? That there's an aspect to this covenant, like, and I go with a layered covenants view, that the unconditional covenant part is that God's going to make this work, even if Abraham and his descendants don't do things right. He's going to make it up because the covenant is ultimately with himself, right? Um, and so this is an example of him doing that, right? We have very early on an example of God doing that, where even whenever even whenever his people are not doing things right, God is going to step in to make certain things happen that need to happen. And Isaac is a thing that needs to happen, right? Um and to me, that's also somewhat related to, so also the other thematic thing that's going on with this story is that um and I don't think we specified it here, but so let me go.
Can I ask something real quick? And I
Yeah,
don't
sure.
always know how to think. I don't always know how to think about this because
Let me just say one thing, just so that I can
sure.
finish my thought, which is that, um, yeah. So it actually doesn't say here, but the name Isaac means to laugh. That's what the name means, um, and so it's it's not arbitrary that Isaac's name, meaning to laugh, is associated with this story about Sarah laughing to herself about how crazy this whole thing is, and also about um, the way that God's knowledge works about him knowing that Sarah is laughing, right? That
Mm,
is that's also part of what this story is. Sorry, go ahead. What's your
mm.
question?
Um, well, I think it has to do with what you just said, where that you're like God's ultimately making this covenant with himself. He's ultimately saying that Abraham, even if you screw up, I'm still going to do this thing. And I think that that is kind of the story of the Bible is like what was intended in the garden. God's like, I'm still going to do that. I'm
Yeah,
still doing that. But so like ultimately God accomplishes the very thing he set out to do. He just takes the long path to get there.
yeah,
But and I think sometimes people confuse like this. They start saying things like, "Well, you're saying that we were kind of like plan B." And I'm
yeah,
like, "Well, I think that's a oversimplification, but it can be tricky where it's like from our perspective it looks like plan B. And it's like, well, did God mess up? Of course God didn't mess up. Like he always follows through on exactly what he intended to do. He doesn't make mistakes.
Hmm.
So so I guess my question would be like, how do you personally work through that argument or that thought process of like, even if it looks like plan B, it's actually plan A. And I could give all sorts of examples of that specific view of like, well, that kind of looks like plan B. Like God
Yeah,
maybe messed
no,
up
no,
in this, and it's not. Yeah.
yeah, I'm firmly on the everything that God's doing here is plan A. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm firmly in,
Oh, I know
and
you are.
yeah,
I'm just
yeah,
trying to think of,
yeah, I'm
I'm
firmly
just
in
trying
that
to think
camp.
through it. Yeah.
And so yeah, so basically right, so like I go with the view which actually we could actually kind of go down to some of the later sections and we'll end up kind of touching on. Actually, you know what? Since we have a limited amount of time, I'm gonna keep going, and
Yeah, go
I
ahead,
think
man.
we'll end up answering that question as we get into the other things that I want to talk about.
Yeah, okay.
Because kind of the rest of this chapter is sort of about that, right? Because really what you're asking like is what is God's like relationship with time and
Hmm.
how does that like work, right? Because um you you're you're either going to you're either going to go with like the Calvinist thing where it's just, oh, he all planned it for this big great mystery that we can't quite figure out, um and it all brings glory to him in some way that again we can't quite figure out, even though there's a passage in here which sort of refutes that very fundamental idea. um right, whenever Abraham's like, would it be just for you to do this? Like if you go with like the Calvinist view, it doesn't matter what God does, it's just. um right, and so like that actually doesn't make any sense of what Abraham is even arguing, right? Um, but if you go with a view that if if you go with a Molinist view of God knows what people are going to do in certain situations, um, and he knows the end goal of what he wants, then he can take his actions in the world in a certain way to get to that endpoint. Um, and all along the way, free agents are making their own choices. It's just that he knows how he knows how that he knows how that argument's going to go. He knows when Abraham's going to stop arguing, right? Like he knows how that's going to go. And so it's not right. So even with this story, right? Like God knew ahead of time, right? So this is verses 16, right? This is this paragraph right here. God knows what he's about to do to Sodom. Right? He goes, should I hide it from Abraham? like like he knows what he's about to do to Sodom, right? Um uh even though he also has this idea, oh man, yeah, so I'm not fully getting into. Let me pause all of that because there's some
That's
other
cool.
things that we'll get into that for a second.
Yeah, that's fine,
There's
man.
a few other things that I want to touch on, where it says the way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. uh, I want to highlight that because um, just to say that the biblical authors are not ignorant of the world and how things work, right? So like pretty clearly, this is like talking about like menopause, right? Like Sarah has stopped having periods, right? And so they're aware of this idea that um, the like when women like whenever it says like the way of women, what it's talking about there is that them having periods, and so when that stops, they can't have kids like anymore. They understand that they're not, you know, like they're not 17th and 18th and 19th century biologists. They're not modern biologists and can like pinpoint exactly why all that's happening, but they know it well enough. Um, which is one of the things that I think a lot of times whenever we think about people in the past, we just dismiss that they actually know how that works. But also from that, you can see why they have this idea of there is a connection between um, like blood and things that generate life, right? This is why they have this idea of uh, like the blood is the lifeblood. It's the thing that like animates you and gives you life, right? Um, it, it's not uh it's not a crazy idea, right? It's a symbol, and this again goes to whenever I talk about symbolism. A symbol is a thing that like it gets abstracted or spiritualized, but it has like a real function in the world. And the reason why we have the spiritualized and abstracted view is because it correlates to something in reality. Um, uh, Other kind of questions. So now we'll get back. That was the only thing that I wanted to point out. So now we'll get back into discussion about like what do they know and all that stuff. Um, to me, this shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do. So first of all, this whole like interaction is kind of strange, right? Because they're walking to Sodom. Abraham is following him, and God just has this side conversation seemingly to himself, right? like uh right we have no indication that Abraham knows what God says right here. um and so this is gonna get into like your like, oh, okay, like how do you um I think this impacts a little bit even your like how was this story written, sort of a thing, right? So like uh this is one of the like, if it was straight, like if it's a straight if it's a straight like an oral like story that like passes down, like, okay, when did Abraham hear God like say this, right? um but if it's a thing that's revealed to Moses, which is the tradition, right? Okay, then God told Moses, Hey, I had this little side conversation whenever I um met with Abraham." um and it's an interesting deliberation, right? Because you then kind of have to ask yourself, why would God want to shield Abraham from what he's about to do, right? And so there's sort of a philosophical question here, which I don't, at the moment, I don't think I have a super good answer of like what would God gain from hiding the fact that he is going to punish Sodom and Gomorrah from Abraham? And it's like it to me it has something to do with this idea that has been kind of running along throughout the scripture about like, what does it mean to know God? And like, and this is sort of um it's not the first instance in the text of God punishing mankind. Like, that's happened repeatedly. But this is the first instance of God punishing um like a select collective group. Every other time, right? Um God's kind of punished everybody in a sense, right? Like, he punishes Adam and Eve at the same time. Um right? He I guess you could say that with Cain, like he just punishes Cain, but he's kind of punishing all of Cain's descendants, right? At the same time. With Noah, he's punishing everybody. And so I think that there's something related to um the idea that he's punishing a specific group there, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure as to why exactly um God's hesitant to to show this to Abraham. But it has to be connected to the idea that seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations shall be blessed in him, right? That's his reason for wanting to not show Abraham. Like it's this thing about I don't want you to see me punishing this certain group. And it's almost in a sense because he's like, well, the ultimate plan is actually going to bless this group, right? Like, he's like, I'm not sure if I want to show you the fact that I am going to punish this group in a specific way at a specific time, because the ultimate plan that you're involved with is actually to bless them. And I think part of that is to actually kind of avoid um, the problem that actually a lot of modern day Jews and a lot of modern day Christians have of them blowing themselves up in importance, um, and being like, oh well, we're better than like that group or whatever over there. And it's like, well, actually, the purpose of what you're doing is actually to bless that group that God is actually actively punishing, and it's going to be important for you to remember that. And I also think that that is somewhat of a related idea to this whole um negotiation uh thing. Um because yeah, there's one other thing that I want to talk about. Um yeah, ah, we're so strapped for time. Um so um I'll try and say this really quickly. Um this verse here. I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know. One of the things that I've argued against a bunch in the past couple of chapters and weeks is this idea of open theism and dynamic omniscience. And a lot of people that are proponents of open theism and dynamic omniscience, um, they have this idea that when we read the anthropomorphic language in Genesis and in the Bible about God, that uh, we shouldn't put caveats on how that works, which I've pretty much always argued you do need to put caveats onto how that works, and come to a slightly different understanding than our normal human way of understanding things like jealousy, anger, repentance, and all of that, and remembering and all of that stuff. Um, and they would say that no, you shouldn't. That it works in a very similar way to humans for God, and so therefore that leads you to this idea of dynamic omniscience, which is again that God. So there's three types of knowledge in relationship to time. There is past knowledge, which is everything that happened in the past. There is present knowledge, which is everything that's currently happening. And a lot of times those two things get lumped together and it is referred to as free knowledge. And then there is future knowledge, and this is knowledge of future events. The Molinist affirms another category, which is called middle knowledge, which are um, which are all contingencies of future events, and also passive events. And so what it is n- not that God knows what will happen or has happened in the past, which is free knowledge, Not just that he knows what will happen in the future, but he knows what would happen if the conditions had been different. That's middle knowledge. So if you affirm middle knowledge, you're a Molinist. I'm a Molinist. Um, most Calvinists are, or a lot of them that try to be consistent, actually uh, think that God doesn't have middle knowledge. I don't know why you would think that, but they a lot of them say that they do. The dynamic omniscience proponents say that God only has free knowledge, that God doesn't have knowledge of the future, and that he doesn't have perfect middle knowledge. A lot of them will argue that he has approximate um, middle knowledge, which to me, there's all kinds of problems with that. But they'll say that he has perfect free
That's
knowledge.
that's not too different than us. I mean, we can kind of predict, you
Exactly.
know, we can kind of predict what could happen, what might happen, you
Exactly.
know.
And
Yeah.
this is actually my argument for why God has perfect middle knowledge, because we have imperfect middle knowledge, and like it doesn't make sense to me to say it doesn't make sense to me for the Calvinist view where God just doesn't have middle knowledge. Like, I have approximate middle knowledge. Why wouldn't God have middle knowledge? That makes no sense. So I think that view is wrong. And I also think the view is wrong of God has middle knowledge in the same way that I have middle knowledge. Like, that seems really goofy. And I've actually heard omniscience proponents will say, like, oh, well, like, he knows like what like God basically uses his free knowledge, and he uses his logical like his logical capabilities to basically know what are the possible outcomes, and then God knows like a percentage of what's the chance that like each outcome like will occur. And I'm like, well, okay, there's a percentage chance that each outcome will occur. Like, maybe um there's a 75% chance that this outcome will occur, and there's a 25% chance that this outcome will occur. But there's also a percentage chance of how accurate is God's prediction that one or the other outcome will occur. And the thing is like, right, like I might look at a situation, or like I can do that. I can predict something within a percentage chance. And but then I also have a confidence, which is a different percentage, about how sure I am that that thing is going to occur. And the thing is like, the smarter that you get and the more intimately that you know the being that's making that choice, right, that's affecting that outcome, the more accurate you are going to be. And so if you just have, to me, I think that if you just have infinite free knowledge, it actually just also makes sense that you have infinite middle knowledge. There's no, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't have infinite middle knowledge. Regardless,
That makes a lot of sense. And like this idea that you would have imperfect middle knowledge actually has massive theological,
it has tons of
um,
problems. It has
like
tons of problems.
it's hugely problematic. I mean, it really gets down to like, are we even sure about our salvation? Because is God just like playing Russian roulette with our
Yes.
salvation?
Yes.
Like,
It also makes it so that like anytime that God is like prophesying, like what exactly is going on there, and it gets very goofy, and in my opinion they get very goofy things. Regardless, the reason why I brought that up for this verse right here is, if like the main way that they get to it is by arguing this, they argue from this standpoint of, oh, well, whenever you have, anthropomorphic language, you shouldn't like contextualize it. Except for I've never seen them handle this verse, which this verse, if you don't contextualize it, what it's actually saying is that God doesn't have free knowledge, right? Because what he says is, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. If he doesn't, like, if you take that at face value, what that means is that means God doesn't have free knowledge. Free knowledge means you know all past events and all current events. This right here is saying that he doesn't know if Sodom and Gomorrah have actually done according to the outcry that has come to him. He is having to go down there like a normal king, right? Because this is what a normal king would do. This is why this verse is written the way that it is. What a normal king does is a normal king gets an outcry and then goes out with his forces, sees if the outcry is accurate, and if it's true, he levels the town. That's what they do, right? And actually, we have examples of this in like elsewhere in the Old Testament, right? Like right there's the story of uh the one like priest or whatever goes to like a town and they treat him and his concubine really bad. They kill his concubine, right? And he cuts up the concubine, sends it all out. Israel all comes together and they kill this whole town, right? That is basically a version of this story, right? And so that's why that's written there. But if you're taking it as face value, right? This means he doesn't have free knowledge, which if that's the case, if we're not contextualizing it at all and we're interpreting this verse in the same way that they want us to interpret the other verses, you would actually have to end up with a God that is not omniscient. You would just have to say that the God of the Bible isn't omniscient. And to me, that's ridiculous and goes against a bunch of other verses that are in the Bible. And it doesn't even thematically match up with the rest of the surrounding text, right? Because the rest of the surrounding text says he knows what he's going to do to them, and this whole debate here, right? So now we're on to the part of talking about the debate, and I don't want to skip over this, so I'll read what I have. The debate. Why is God debating Abraham here? The answer, in my opinion, has to be that the reason why this debate is in the text is to show that you can, in some way, debate with God. I think that this is obvious and consistent with the rest of the Bible, and namely should be compared to when Jacob wrestles with God. In the same way, it's like, why is that in there? It's to show that you can wrestle with God. And it's actually, in a similar way, similar to the parable that Jesus says about like ask and you shall receive, like knock and like keep asking, right? And it's a story about like you keep asking and you keep knocking even if you're annoying like the person, right? Um However, you are also supposed to learn that you can't really win. You can't really win the debate, right? Again, think about the situation with Jacob, right? Jacob wins, right? In the story it says like you have striven with God and prevailed, right? That like the God tells Jacob you have won. But he also hasn't won because God put out his hip, right? And so he also loses the fight, right? Um, this is the same thing, in my opinion, that's happening here, right? Is Abraham wins the debate. He is able to negotiate God down, but he also doesn't win because he lacks knowledge of the hearts of the people. He doesn't know how truly corrupt they are. He thinks that he has talked God down to a number that surely the citizens of Sodom and Gomorrah meet for the number of righteous people, but they don't. And Abraham doesn't know that, but God does know that. Um, And also, so now I'll try to get back to like your question that you said. Because I have a Molinist view, I partially think that the reason why Abraham is partially the person that God is using to enact this plan is because God knew that Abraham would stop at 10, right? I think God knew that Abraham was going to stop at 10. And so God allows the conversation to occur, right? Like, like, right? Like the right. God could have left at the 50 part. He could have left at the 45 part, right? It says, and the Lord went his way, right? Like he could have finished the conversation at any time, but he finishes the conversation at the 10. Um, and that's because he knows he knows how many righteous people are actually in Sodom and Gomorrah. And so to me, that's sort of how uh, that interplay works of God knows what's going to occur, and there are certain things that he wants to occur, but at the same time, he wants us as free agents um, to also to struggle with him and to do certain things and to negotiate with him. And there are reasons for us to do that negotiation, for us to do that that struggling with God, even when we're put into situations where it looks like we lose. Um, and so, again, that's I hope somewhat answers the question that you asked earlier. Do you have any other questions?
Well, the flip side of that seems like it also works because Moses at times uh, would plead with the Lord not to destroy Israel in the moments of the rebellion,
Yes.
and God actually honored that because
Yes.
he didn't truly want to destroy them,
Yep.
and so the question then becomes if in that scenario if there isn't someone to stand in the gap, does it lead to God having to destroy Israel? And so it's kind of like this interplay between our relationship, I guess it's like our co-laboring with God.
Yes.
um so I don't know what your thoughts are on that, if that adds another layer to it, or
Well, yeah,
if it's
for
pretty
sure.
much the flip side of it, just the same with the same thing.
Right. Well, I mean, yes, it's the same sort of a it is the same sort of a deal, right? Um, and it is God is acting in a certain way because he's trying to get right, like he's trying to get certain things to occur, right? Um, like he's trying to demonstrate here that he is going to punish people. He is going to punish the truly wicked. Like you need to understand that. But in a different scenario, he's also trying to communicate that I really should punish you. Like he really should, but he doesn't want to, and he will restrain himself and display mercy upon people. Like both of those things, right? Those tendencies, those tensions exist within within like the Most High, and that's super important for like all of these all of these narratives are super important for people to understand who the God of all creation is, because because ultimately how you live I have this phrase that I always say, which is ultimately you live out your theology, right? And so part of the thing that God accomplishes in each of these things is, so there's immediate effects in the story, right? Um like in this one, right, he punishes Sodom, which is good for because it does justice in the land. Um it also demonstrates to Abraham that he can negotiate with God, and that uh, but it also demonstrates that God's going to get his way, right? It has all of these effects, and those things are going to end up impacting Abraham's later decisions. Like Abraham's later decisions and actions are all influenced by his interactions with God. But also, these stories are written down in the Bible, and these stories get passed on to us. And now we hear them, and now these stories impact us and how we live, right? And so it puts us in a situation where we go, okay, in my life, how am I going to relate to God? How am I going to relate to other people? How am I going to relate to like the non-believers that are sinning and not following God? Like how do I do all that, right? Like all of these stories like come together and impact things in a multitude um, of ways. Like there's layers that these actions end up having. Um, and what I believe is the that God knew how these stories were going to impact the world, and that's why, right? He did them at the time and place so that they could get written down, so that they could end up changing the world. Because, right, I think it's pretty obvious that the Bible as a text has changed the world more than any other text that's ever been written. Like that's a pretty easy um it's a pretty easy argument to make. Um did I answer your question, or did I just go off on a
Oh yeah,
tangent?
for
I'm not
sure.
really sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm.
Um
Yes, sir.
okay. Well, Andrew never showed up. Um do you have anything else?
Nah,
Um
I think that I look for, can I go listen to Genesis 17 now? I
yes,
don't know.
you
Oh, I
can.
can. Good,
It should be on YouTube already.
because I really want to. I want to understand. Well, not. I don't know if anybody perfectly understands it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts if you talk about it all. Subject of circumcision, and it's kind of an interesting thing,
I
especially when you look at
I don't
how it
know if I get
transitioned.
into it as
Yeah.
much as what you would want me to, but I'd say go listen to it and then hit me with
Okay.
whatever questions you want.
I feel like it in some ways connects to, and I don't know if you say this, but I feel like in some ways it connects to the reproduction organ and how
Oh yeah.
that's, you know, how that's connected to life.
Oh yeah.
And
No, I definitely say that. Yeah. One
and
of the
so there's like life that comes from death.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh no, I definitely say that. That's one of the things that I say, that it's that the fundamentally what circumcision is uh you cut off a piece of yourself to prevent being cut off. Um,
Hmm.
that's what it is, because I'm reiterating stuff, and so whatever, but it's fine.
Yeah, I'll go
But
listen to it then.
fundamentally, what being cut off means in like the Jewish context is it means um, that you don't have a family anymore. Like you don't have a line that comes after
Right.
you. That's what it means to be cut off. Um,
Right.
and so the reason you why you get circumcised and you have your children, your sons be circumcised, is so that they can maintain their identity. It's a mechanism by which they maintain their identity. And so they, because you have to remember, they're sojourners in the world, right? And so they're going to be out mixing with other people. And so that is like the fundamental way that you maintain what your identity is. You have this physical thing, um, where you cut off a piece of the flesh, right? It is a little death, right? It is a little death. Um,
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
that that um it it preserves your identity, it preserves your life, um and all you have to do is just think about, like, okay, well, what happens if you don't circumcise your sons, right? Okay, well, you don't circumcise your sons, and then so they don't circumcise their sons, and so they don't circumcise their sons, and eventually your sons just assimilate into the wider culture. They forget the
Mm.
fact that they are a part of this distinct family, right? And now that family ceases to exist, right? They, they're not there anymore.
That's a really good point, because like what other, like you have to choose an identity marker, and if you don't have that, then what is it? I mean, I guess God could have chosen something else,
Right,
but
and eventually he will have more things, right? Eventually there will
yeah.
be a covenant at Sinai and all that stuff. But prior to that, no, it's he's making it simple. It's just this, like, one thing, right? And
Mm.
and like, this is actually also why, like, um uh it becomes important for Moses to be circumcised, right? And so there's a story about the fact that Moses isn't circumcised, right? And what did that do for Moses? It hid the fact of who he was, right? Like, it made it so that he could blend in and assimilate with the wider culture. But then it became a problem because now he needs to lead these people, right? And so it becomes an issue, and in order to for him to actually, like, do that role, he needed to be circumcised. Um, and so then there's a whole bunch of debate about what actually happens with the story about, right. I don't know if you know that story, but Zilpah, his wife,
With his son,
yeah,
yeah,
like
it's a
she
weird story.
she circumcises his son and, like, all this stuff. Um, if you haven't heard it, there's actually a podcast that Michael Heiser does about that, and it's super
Oh,
interesting. Yeah,
oh, I'll
it's
go
very
listen to that. That's
interesting.
cool.
Yeah.
That's all. It's like one of those really strange, obscure stories in the Bible.
Yes.
Just like, oh, God wanted to kill him because his son was not circumcised,
Yes.
and
Yes.
what is her son or his wife actually performs a circumcision, and
Yep.
or something like that, and
And then
um,
she takes, like, like, the foreskin and, like, ritually, like, puts it on him to, like, circumcise him, right? And this is
oh, interesting. I'll
yeah.
have to go listen
So
to Heiser's.
this is like related to this whole idea of, like, identity, and, like,
Yeah.
how identity passes, and how identity is, like, connected between, like, the generations, and it goes back and forth and all of this stuff. And it's actually, like, to me, that's one of the things that I think is one of the super actually, I think Michael Heiser actually does a pretty good job of talking about this sort of idea in general. But I think it's
Mm.
the way that identity works with family is probably one of the things that I think is the most strange to, like, modern Western thinking, um, because we're just so individualistic that we don't we don't really conceptualize how people think about, like, um, the fact that, like, their family is them. Um, we don't
Yeah.
we don't do that. We don't
Mm.
do this thing where, like, your family is you.
Hmm.
Which is also related to the thing that Abraham's going to do, where he's sacrificing Isaac. Like, really, the thing that you're supposed to understand with the binding of Isaac story is that Abraham is actually sacrificing himself. Like,
Hmm.
at a really fundamental level, that's what he's doing. Um, but yeah, so we'll talk about this more, but I'll end it there. Thank you for coming.
For sure, man. All right. Sounds good. Have a good night.
You too.